Hello, everyone. Welcome to Conversations with Dad. I am Bob the Orc, and we're going to be talking today with my dad, and he's going to tell a story, kind of a fairy tale or bedtime story, if you will, about Cinderella and the Urchin Prince. And this is a story that he's told over campfires to young Boy Scouts. He's told this to my brother's kids, and we're going to record it. And here's Dad. Let's begin.
Okay. Um, there are two classic stories, and everybody pretty much knows the story of Cinderella. And there's another less known story about a street urchin who became a prince. And what is a street urchin? Well, many years ago in primitive cultures, they didn't have money for social programs or orphanages or things like that. And even today in third world countries, you have young people whose parents maybe died due to disease or various problems, and the kids lived literally on the streets. They might sleep in a doorway. They'd live by their wits. They'd, maybe help a merchant by delivering things. They do errands and this sort of thing. They beg for food, and wasn't a great life. Cinderella, of course, was a girl whose mother had died. She lived in the home of her stepmother, and she got her name because she slept at night by the fireplace to stay warm, and a fireplace has cinders in it, so they called her Cinderella. Now, I've combined the two stories. I've never before seen the two together, but here's a combination of the two. This story shows that sometimes young people from unfortunate situations can have things work out well for them. So this is one of those happy stories. So it begins this way. Once upon a time, long, long ago, in a land far, far away, there lived an old king who had lost his wife and children to a terrible plague many years before. Quite a number of those in the kingdom had died also. However, he was a wise king. He ruled justly, and he was very kind to his people. The king was well loved by everyone, but the populace were fearful about their future, as the king without heirs grew older and faced ultimate death. The old king was also concerned about this and did his best to test his servants, administrators, and underlings to see if any of them could wisely rule the kingdom after his death. He was always disappointed, because by adulthood people had become quite fixed in their ways. Even if he found someone who was honest and kind, the person lacked the leadership qualities and vision needed to plan, prepare, and lead this kingdom into its future. After all, it was a relatively small, poor kingdom, surrounded by larger, more powerful rival kingdoms. Tact and intelligence on the part of its leader would be needed for this kingdom to survive well into the future. Also, tradition required that the ruler be a man of royal blood, or at least be married to a woman of royal blood background, thus elevating him to royal status. The thinking was that no upper class woman would be permitted by her aristocratic family to marry a man lacking these necessary qualities. Experience of royalty at that time in that part of the world over many years had demonstrated that a peasant did not have the background, experience, and education to be a wise, effective ruler. Sometimes a peasant warlord rose to power, but would usually fail due to lack of experience and wisdom needed to govern properly. Power alone is not sufficient to govern. Very many specialized qualities and skills are also required. Finally, the old king had an idea. He sent out his servants into the bazaar or marketplace to look for urchins, homeless, parentless children. About 30 of these were brought to the king's palace and into the great banquet room where a feast had been prepared. The children rudely pushed and shoved each other for the best places around the table, closest to the food. The old king was situated at one end of the long table, away from most of the food. A younger, smaller child had been elbowed aside, and the only remaining place was to sit next to the king, away from most of the food. Also, upon entering the banquet hall, this child had paused to observe or look at the situation, while the rest of the children had rushed for the food. As the young urchin sat next to the old king, he noticed that the king had not yet started eating. So he sat quietly and looked at the king. When the king picked up a napkin and put it in his lap, the urchin did the same. When the king picked up a spoon and started having some soup, the urchin did the same. Throughout the meal, this young street urchin carefully followed and mimicked and followed what the king did. At the end of the meal, the old king had his servants return all the children to the marketplace except for the one street urchin who had sat next to him. The king kept this young man in his palace, in the position of a servant, but subtly treated him like a son, including him in many of his meals, making sure the young man observed him carrying on his duties and making important decisions. As years passed, the young man grew to become a fit, healthy, mentally alert individual who showed kindness for and understanding of others. The old king was very pleased with his choice and made every effort to make sure this young man had an excellent background. At their meals together, the wise old king would question him, "Young man, what have you learned?" The young man responded, "I have learned that to lead, you must plan ahead and know where you're going. Furthermore, all consequences of your decisions must be considered, both in the present and in the future. A leader at all times must be prepared for anything, for all eventualities. Being prepared is very important. Also, kindness and consideration of those you lead is very important. You must always keep their best interest in mind. When giving instructions, it is good to speak clearly and give instructions which can easily be understood, including sometimes the reasons and future consequences of these actions. Also, it helps to give directions in a reasonable way rather than a harsh order. Phrasing something in the form of a question is a good way to request things, such as, would you be able to open the window so fresh air and sunlight can come in? It is a command, yet phrased in a courteous way and gives the reason behind the request. The old king suppressed a contented smile, a happy smile. The urchin had grown to become a fine, intelligent young man. He was certainly a prospect to lead the kingdom. However, he was still quite young for the full burden of leadership. The king had other prospects he was considering as well. In the meantime, the king continued giving responsibilities to his very servants to see how they might possibly lead. Several showed some promise, but each had his flaws and faults. Time was running out, and the old king called the former urchin for a chat. "Young man, you are aware of the dilemma I face. I have several good prospects for taking over this kingdom, but I need your help. All these prospects are commoners and would need an aristocratic wife in order to become king. Young man, I want you to travel in search of such a prospective wife, a princess. There is, however, no hope this princess will be for you. I want you to select her as being the best, kindest, most intelligent princess you are able to find. Select her as if you were choosing her for yourself, but bear in mind she will not be for you. My decision is that this princess will be for the servant I have chosen to become a prince through marriage to her. And thus, upon marriage to her, he will be able to lead this kingdom when I am no longer able to." The young man who had been an urchin had a heavy heart at the thought of one day losing this wonderful old king who had been like a father to him and who had in many ways treated him like a son. However, he realized that he was still quite young and inexperienced, and that the king had selected one of the older servants of the king that he had been nurturing for his position. Setting out, the urchin made a circuit of the surrounding kingdoms, searching for a suitable princess. There were no good prospects at the first two kingdoms he visited. The young man had purposely dressed himself as a stable boy, and those who accompanied him as unimportant servants. However, one who accompanied him was given the appearance of a low-level emissary, and approached the royalty as such. From his lowly appearance, the young former street urchin could see that all the available royal females he encountered in those kingdoms were self-centered, egotistical, and rude. They cared only about themselves and not about the people governed. Travel was difficult to the next kingdom, over rocky mountainous terrain. The trip was exhausting but necessary. They arrived late one evening at this kingdom. Almost everyone had gone to bed, but when they explained their purpose, they were ushered into the courtyard of the castle. One young servant girl was still working. She looked very tired, but she showed them where to put their horses and places for them to sleep in the stable. It was too late to disrupt those in the castle. Although exhausted, she brought them food, the best of what was available in the royal kitchen. She did everything in her power to make them comfortable, until she looked like she was about to drop from exhaustion. "Tomorrow morning," she explained, "I will wake you, provide food and a means to clean up and refresh yourselves. Then you will be escorted into the castle to conduct your business, whatever it is." Impressive, the young man thought. She cares for others above herself. What a queen she would make. Where are we? If she were not just a mere servant girl. The next day, they came upon a very interesting discovery. The servant girl they had encountered the night before indeed might be a prospect for them. The king in this realm had lost his wife to a plague, perhaps the same one which had devastated their own kingdom. And the servant girl was this king's daughter. She was of royal blood. However, when the king remarried, his new queen already had a son from a previous marriage. This marriage made sense because it united two neighboring kingdoms. However, as this king grew old and feeble, his new queen assumed the reins of power and exercised them through her son, who was from the previous marriage. The queen and her son were harsh, tyrannical rulers, and they had relegated the king's daughter to the role of a servant girl who did the lowliest of tasks. Even though she was abused by her stepmother, the queen, and by her half-brother, the young girl remained kind and generous. It turned out, upon negotiating, the queen and her son were very, very anxious to get rid of this girl. Even better than relegating her to servant status, getting her out of the kingdom would be even better for them. That way her existence would be no threat to their leadership. The girl had grown up around her loving mother, the queen, and absorbed much love and kindness from her father, the king. Playing as a child at their feet, she observed how they ruled with wisdom and kindness. They admonished her to be like them as she grew up, and she did all she could to understand what they did and the obligations of leadership and leading a kingdom. Her father, the king, had not anticipated the consequences of having married the widowed queen of the neighboring kingdom. On the surface, the union made sense because it united two kingdoms into a more powerful one. However, when he proposed marriage to the queen of the neighboring kingdom, he did not know her well, and most of the high regard he held for the kingdom was because of her husband, now dead king. The new queen was a treacherous and scheming woman, and these qualities had carried over to her son, who was cruel as well. The plague had weakened the king, and as his health failed, the new queen and her son gradually relegated the princess into the acting role of a servant girl. There was nothing the other servants could do about this. However, they nurtured the girl as if they were her proxy parents. Even though she was treated harshly by her stepmother, the queen, the other servants made sure she had enough to eat and constantly plied her with healthy foods. Also, her body flourished from all the healthy work she did, carrying firewood and heavy pails of water, feeding the livestock, and all manner of difficult chores. Her skin glowed with a radiant peaches and cream complexion because of all the healthy food. She had toned muscles and an extremely tiny, trim waist because of all the heavy chores and lifting she did. Her personality was vibrant, and she was always cheerful and friendly with all the other servants. Of course, all of them loved her. On short notice, the queen and her cruel son wanted the girl to leave. They needed no dowry and wanted to get rid of the threat to their existence as soon as possible. Also, there was no question this girl would be the ideal princess the searchers had been looking for. As they were preparing to leave, a woman who was the head housekeeper of the castle called the young princess aside. "I have something for you," she said. Going into a back storeroom of the castle, the housekeeper opened a large trunk and pulled out an amazing, beautiful cream-colored dress. "This is the gown your mother was married and coronated in, and I have kept it hidden these past years. If the new queen had found it, she would have had it ripped apart and had taken all the pearls that were sewn onto it. Try it on and see if it fits." Success. The dress was almost a perfect fit. "Quickly, let's fold it and place it in this unassuming bag. We will secretly put it with your traveling things." In short order, they were on their way. The princess had no nice everyday clothes, so she traveled looking as if she were one of the servants who had come to negotiate for her. Her only real possession was her mother's beautiful dress, which had been secretly placed with the traveling things. As they traveled, the urchin servant got to know the princess better, and he was even more convinced that she was an excellent choice. Arranged marriages were common in that time, and he was certain that with her radiant, cheerful disposition, she would gradually come to love the man the old king had chosen for her. The king was very wise, and certainly he had selected someone very suitable for her. As the princess got to know the young man who had rescued her from being a servant, she secretly admired him and was very impressed with all his wonderful qualities. He was kind, thoughtful, and considerate of the other servants he had been chosen to lead. He had wonderful moral qualities, and he was always very considerate to her. Knowing he could never have her, he was very thoughtful and respectful of her. Also, his active life had given him strong, rippling muscles and a very manly appearance. For someone as young as he was, for a servant, he was surprisingly educated, knowledgeable, and open-minded. In short, he was an amazing young man and would have been a terrific prince had he not been a commoner. 2 servants were sent ahead of the others to inform the old king that they had found the princess they had been looking for, one suitable for elevating his chosen servant to that of royalty, so he would be able to succeed the old king. It was a long, difficult trip, but the servants who had gone ahead had been able to inform the king. The king then sent them back to the group with the princess to announce that preparations were being made for their arrival. Upon return to the kingdom, there would be a marriage between the princess and the commoner the old king had selected. As they approached the kingdom's main city, in early morning, church bells were ringing through the city, and people were celebrating throughout the streets. The old king sent a group to meet them and escort them back to the castle. There would be an immediate wedding that day. The young princess was taken to her quarters, bathed and garbed in her mother's beautiful dress. The urchin servant took the horses to the stables, groomed and fed them. He had not had time to clean up when he was instructed to attend the ceremony at the main cathedral. Quickly, he cleaned up, donned his best servant's outfit, and hurried to the cathedral. One of the king's servants escorted him and took him into the side door of the cathedral. Once inside, it took a while for his eyes to adjust to the semi-darkness inside. Illuminated by candles, it still seemed very dark inside. A bit dazed by the change in brightness, he followed the servant who was taking him in. From the sides of the front, he could see that the cathedral was packed with people, all in their finery, and as he approached from the outside, he could see that the streets were filled with well-wishers who were unable to enter. Standing in the side at the front, he was not sure where he should go. However, the old king noticed him and motioned for him to approach and assist him with the ceremony. He looked down at his clothing and wished he had looked nicer, but he had no choice but to approach. Suddenly, the bishop approached him with a beautiful wine-colored cloak, which had a white fur collar, and placed this cloak over the young man's shoulders, walking him up to the king. Standing next to the old king was the princess he had chosen and escorted from the other kingdom. "Here is your bride," the king said. "You have learned much. You have been a wonderful apprentice. After marrying her, you will be a prince and you will be heir to my throne." The old king turned to both the princess and the young man and asked, "Is this agreeable to both of you?" Dumbfounded, they both stood there, and their wildest dreams had just come true. "Yes," they both said, and nodded in agreement. The old king then said, "Leadership comes with responsibility. I expect the best out of both of you." "Yes," they both said almost simultaneously. Of course, they both lived happily ever after. The old king lived to a ripe old age, and the kingdom's people prospered and were extremely happy. Oh, and by the way, the young urchin servant, as he was growing into manhood, was very educated and courteous to others. His nickname, as other servants called him, was Charming, and he became Prince Charming. Furthermore, the princess, when relegated to the role of servant girl while she was growing up, had been known, since she slept near the fireplace for warmth, as Cinderella. This may not be the story you've always known, but is the story of Prince Charming and Cinderella. The end. What have we learned from this story? Well, we have learned that from the old king, that planning is the key to leadership. The old king planned ahead and nurtured the young street urchin for many years into becoming a worthy, capable, mature prince who showed a sincere interest in other people. We also learned from the future prince that it is good to push yourself mentally and physically so you'll become more capable, to choose good, worthy people to model yourself after, and to do your best, that there is no substitute for excellence. What do you think?
Well, I can see why you tell it at the campfires. It's actually a pretty good Boy Scout bedtime story. Teaches the leadership qualities that you want to instill in people. A little bit predictable, but
maybe not as predictable for kids. But
yeah, I guess it probably
your
helped.
Your brother's children thought it was a decent story.
Yeah, no, I bet they loved it.
So this will be recording. This will be a recording for you, and if you put it on the internet, maybe other people can
All
put the
right.
story out there, but it has some good values in it.
All right. Well, and you seem to have fun telling
Okay.
it, so I think it's worked out pretty well.
All right. Well, I'll see you next on the next video we do. All right.
All right. Well, let me switch back to the intro screen, and thank you everyone for listening to my dad's bedtime story, or fairy tale, or whatever we're gonna call this. I hope you enjoyed the video. Please share the video to anybody you think would be interested. Like the video, subscribe to the channel, and we'll do this again. Thanks a lot, Dad, and good night.